My name is Renee Maurer, and I'm the coordinating curator of the Alma W. Everything is Beautiful exhibition on view at the Phillips Collection until January 23rd. Thank you for attending tonight's virtual program. Hosting this show at the Phillips has been an enriching experience, and I would like to thank our speakers tonight, exhibition curators Dr. Seth Feman and Dr. Jonathan Frederik Walz, for organizing such a wonderful project. I would also like to thank sponsors, AFLAC, the Henry Luce Foundation, the Andy Warhol Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Robert and Mercedes Eichholz Foundation, the Robert Lehman Foundation, Dina and George Perry, and many others for their invaluable support. I would also like to acknowledge that the Phillips Collection is situated upon the ancestral and unceded lands of the Piscataway people, and we pay respects to their elders, past and present. The Alma W. Thomas Everything is Beautiful exhibition has taught us so much about Thomas's art-filled life. We have learned her imagination and her ingenuity were well developed long before her retirement from teaching in 1960, and her creativity extended far beyond the studio to encompass her many interests, from design to teaching to service to gardening, among other activities. During tonight's program, curators Seth Feman and Jonathan Frederik Walz will discuss how they used a wide range of artworks and archival materials from the archives of the American Art, the Columbia Museum in Georgia, and other sources to uncover new information and offer new insight into Thomas's life and art. The digitization of Thomas's personal papers at the archives, a project funded by the Walton family and the Friends of the Alma Thomas Group, unearthed amazing details. They will share aspects of their process, specific findings culled from their research, and show how deep digging in the archives can help shape narratives around specific topics like it did for this exhibition. At the Phillips, we are in the process of digitizing our own archives managed by Rachel Jacobson, which we examined when we hosted the exhibition, and our findings helped us better understand Thomas's connections to the museum. It placed her in the galleries in the 1930s with DC public school art teachers, in the music room with friends, listening to concerts in the 1940s. Historic periodicals have Thomas identifying Cézanne's Garden at Les Lobes as her favorite painting, which is in our collections, and brochures show her art on view in the galleries and also show the exhibition she attended at the Phillips. Well, tonight's speakers found much common ground in their deep appreciation of Alma Thomas. Dr. Feman is the Deputy Director for Art and Interpretation and Curator of Photography at the Chrysler Museum of Art, where he manages the curatorial, conservation, registration, and educational departments, as well as the Gene Outland Chrysler Library. Before accepting his current role in 2019, Feman served as the Chrysler's Curator of Exhibition and Curator of Photography, a role in which he managed the museum's exhibition schedule as well as the photography collection. He joined the museum staff in 2012 as Manager of Interpretation and is credited for introducing new guidelines for communicating scholarly material in a manner that is more accessible for museum visitors. Before joining the Chrysler, Feman was an educator at the Smithsonian Museum of American Art and taught courses of art history and material culture at William & Mary and Lewis Clark College. He holds a PhD as well as an MA in American Studies from William & Mary. Dr. Walz received an MA and a PhD both in art history from the University of Maryland, College Park. His dissertation analyzed the transatlantic modernist avant-garde and their use of alternative portrayal strategies during the 1910s and 1920s. In 2009 and 2010, he was a student curator for the exhibition Embodied Black Identities in American Art from the Yale University Art Gallery, which appeared at the David C. Driscoll Center and at Yale. He has also published essays and given lectures on a range of topics, from Charles Demuth and Alma W. Thomas to conceptual portraiture and queer rurality. Walz has over 25 years experience in art museums, including more than a decade of service at the National Gallery of Art. And it was in 2016, he was appointed to the Director of Curatorial Affairs and Curator of American Art at the Columbus Museum in Columbus, Georgia, Alma Thomas's hometown. So please welcome Seth and Jonathan. We look forward to your presentations, and after their presentations, please submit your questions in the chat feature. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Renee. Thank you, Renee. Very generous welcome. And thank you to your team as well for inviting me and Jonathan. It's a real pleasure to be here. Jonathan, it's a real pleasure to get to share another speaking opportunity with you. I was saying to Renee before we started, it feels like so long ago that the show was on view at the Chrysler, and it's constantly rewarding that we get to come back and share our experience. So thank you all for taking the time to join us tonight. I'll go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation. I should probably start at the beginning. There we go. When Renee reached out to me and Jonathan about presenting on Alma Thomas, one of the things we very much wanted to talk about was our experience in the archives, because the archives really transformed the way we were thinking about Thomas and the stories that we could tell. And we knew from the moment we started that we wanted to have a different kind of exhibition on Alma Thomas. There have been several important and wonderful exhibitions that focused on Thomas's painting career, particularly the late part of her painting career. But we knew from both our experience in the archive that there was more of a story to tell. And that really took shape for me and Jonathan when he reached out to me. He's at the Columbus Museum, which has this important archive of Thomas materials that is really underutilized, understudied. And he invited me to come down. He knew that I had written part of my dissertation on Alma Thomas, and yet I too had not utilized that collection. So I came down to Columbus and jumped in, and I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. I can't believe the stories that are there to be told. And I think the work that Jonathan and I and the many collaborators that helped us with this project have put forward is really just the beginning. There's so much more to tell. But as I say, we wanted to incorporate that into the exhibition itself. And what I'm showing you is a corner from the installation at the Chrysler. I'm sorry, I didn't include images from the current display, but maybe that's a teaser. You should go and see the current display for yourself before it closes. This is how we installed it at the Chrysler. And this was a corner, sort of, in some ways, it was the conceptual vignette for the entire project, which is that we wanted to show Thomas's diverse and overlapping creative interests. And these were largely informed by things that we found in the archive. So this included things like paintings of her own that she kept in her home, paintings by other people, like the portrait of her by Laura Wheeler Waring you see in the gold frame of the Era Saarinen chair. The chair, which was her favorite chair, a copy of the favorite chair that she had in her home. We wanted to front and center her interest in puppetry and marionettes and contemporary design and cloth making and literature and art history, and in some cases, jewelry making. We know she made this mobile that we discovered in the collection of her great nephew in his home. And we wanted all of these things to be in conversation together. So we planned this, this portion of the show to really highlight that Thomas's interests were diverse, they were overlapping, they spanned a lifetime, and they constantly fed into one another. Jonathan, did you say that you wanted to add something to this? Oh, I think we might have lost Jonathan. Looks like we might have had a frozen screen there. We'll get him to log back in. There you are. Hey, Jonathan.
Hello.
You froze for a second. You said that you wanted to add something to this opening slide.
The show and us two curators recently have received 2 reviews from formalist critics, and I think that this vignette really sort of speaks to the kind of to their disappointment, in the sense that both critics were really lamenting that there was too much stuff in the exhibition besides her art, and also that the show did not really emphasize and really focus on her work from 1966 until 1977. And I think what's funny to me about reading those reviews is that from the very beginning, Seth and I were very clear in our minds that that was the kind of project that we did not want to do. Putting together shows is within sort of a universe of other entities, and something that curators have to think about is what other treatments this material has received in the past. And actually, in the past, Thomas has received exhibitions that start pretty much in 1966 and move forward. And so we felt even more compunction to really try and tell more or a different story, and the archives truly helped us do that.
That's great. Thanks, Jonathan.
And speaking more to that point, you can see here this is a timeline that will appear at all 4 of the exhibition venues. And you'll see the 2 photographs here framed in white. This is right around the time of Thomas's life that she held the exhibition at Howard University that really was the first time that she used what she called Alma's stripes, the kind of broken brush mark that she became really well known for. And you can see that this is like only the last third of her life or so, that there was all of this other stuff that happened long before 1966. And I think more than focusing on painting per se, I think something that really arose from the archives that really struck Seth and myself was that more than painting or more than working in the studio, Thomas was creative in multiple ways. And therefore, if you think about her output in terms of creativity, then yes, there's so many more ways to talk about her prior to her retirement in 1960, because it seems like creativity just drips off of her, and that she, no matter what endeavor she puts her mind to, she comes at it with really a lot of imagination and intelligence.
So part of this story happened with an archival discovery early on, which was not in any specific archive, but was because we started reaching out to people who might have connected to Thomas. And in this case, you see the blue wall color. It also appears in parts of the Phillips installation, and it will appear at other venues as well. This happened because we came across a photograph that had been published in Black Enterprise of the inside of Thomas's home. And we reached out to the photographer to ask if they had any more images. And to both of our sort of gobsmacking surprise, they sent us page after page of slides and color transparencies and black and white contact sheets from their time. And we were able to kind of piece together the interior of Thomas's home, which was also her studio, that and some other records from the historical recognition of her home as a site. So there were important documents that were out there that were put together. A lot of this focused on her use of studio materials. So we were able to reach out to unexpected locations, perhaps. Anacostia had some of her painting materials, including a watercolor set and a palette knife and several brushes. And we were able to look at those as well as what you see in the case in the foreground and in several examples up on the wall further back in this image, which are the works on paper that Thomas made as her studies. And this is something that the Columbus Museum has an embarrassment of riches in. It's pretty extraordinary because I think many people out there have seen a study or a couple of studies. Many museum collections have come to acquire one or two, or individuals have been able to acquire individual ones. But one of the things we were able to do was start to line up similar works and start to see how Thomas was working in repetition and in pattern. And it's hard to see in this installation. You can see it better in life, of course. But one of the things we puzzled through was a working process and how Thomas would kind of come up with her color combinations and her formal inventions. And we sort of came to the tentative conclusion, although we could still debate this. I think we'll probably debate this forever. It seems that she was working in a kind of iterative approach where she would make the same set of forms over and over and over again and really exhaust a set of patterns. So she would paint a red stripe, a blue stripe, and a red stripe over and over and over again until something new started to generate. And then she would work into that area. So she'd start to see a new color sort of form in the overlap, and she would add that color in and really develop it there. Then she would use these, she would carve these up and apply them to effectively collages while working out the patterns for her larger works. This is an important revelation for us that I think only having the ability to see so much of her work presented to us. The next thing I'll talk about here is sort of how we got into the Archives of American Art and then beyond it. So when I first started working on Alma Thomas, it must have been 2000, in any serious way, it must have been like 2007, 2008 at the Archives of American Art. And I give you this sort of silly picture of a film reader because that was the only way to get into Thomas's material at the time. There are incredible benefits to seeing material this way. It allows you to kind of move around with the fluidity that has some benefits, but you can't handle the materials that way. You can't open up folders, and that became very limiting. I was very lucky that at the time, the archives was actively collecting things from Thomas's home. Charles Thomas Lewis, her grandnephew, still lived there. And as he would clean out things, he would deposit more images, most importantly, several boxes and photo albums, boxes of images and photo albums into the collection. And so they were actively growing the collection. And because I was working in the same building, I got sort of preliminary access to the folders, which is like a researcher's dream come true because nothing had been cataloged yet or indexed yet. It was really just all in boxes, and nothing has got a logic given to it yet. Nothing has a particular order, except what I came to discover, and this is sort of what the image on the right is meant to suggest. Thomas's sister, John Maurice, one of Thomas's sisters, John Maurice Thomas, who lived upstairs from Alma Thomas in the family home, they split it to two apartments. She was a librarian by training and had done quite a bit of work to assemble the archive or parts of the archive in advance. And in some ways that it did incredible work because she preserved a ton of things, but it also started to paint a picture, an apt metaphor here, of the Thomas that she wanted to present to the world, which was Thomas as the painter that she became in the last 20 some odd years of her life, the painter that we've all come to know. And so she had really kind of culled the archive in a way that enhanced that part of the story. And you can see here, she wrote in her hand Alma's own words below something else that Alma Thomas had written herself. And this appears throughout the archive. She's sort of creating a bit of a narrative. She's creating a way to appreciate it. All of this also, I should say, changed dramatically. Renee mentioned at the beginning, when the Walton Family Foundation and the Friends of Alma Thomas, and really the Friends of Alma Thomas were the ones who helped us with this initiative, they paid to effectively digitize the collection. And that changed everything because then you could look at multiple things at the same time. So typically in an archive, you get one folder at a time. You have to keep things in order. You have to kind of remember things. Once it's digitized, you can have, as Jonathan and I can both attest, you can have 100 windows open at the same time and start making these cross connections between things and really change the narrative that's there. And so we really owe them quite a bit for bringing us into that opportunity. It also, during the time of COVID, allowed researchers to access this material who couldn't possibly get to DC or when the archives were closed. I'll just finally say that in this area in which John Maurice was really calling the archive, Her archive also gets squashed into it as well. So this lock of hair was something that she had in her kind of section of the papers. And this attestation of a pilgrimage is her pilgrimage. And so there are these things about her own life and her own experience that start to redirect the way that you access the archive. It's not obtrusive, it's not overwhelming, but it's something as a researcher to be attentive to as you're going through the materials.
Something that I feel really proud about is that we were able to locate several bodies of material that really hadn't been accessed for other projects on Thomas, at least since the turn of the millennium. And so this slide also speaks to a different kind of digitization access that's provided. The notebook on the left is from Judith Wilson, who is still with us. She's an African-American art historian and journalist. And these were notes that she took for the feature that she wrote on Thomas for Ms. Magazine in 1979. And you can see that she talked to a lot of people that knew Thomas and were alive at the time. You can see all the list of addresses and phone numbers, plans for Wilson to call these people. And then on the right-hand side, this is a one page from interview notes that art historian Anne Eden Gibson conducted for her own essay for the 1998 exhibition on Alma Thomas that was organized by the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. So on the left, the Wilson papers are at the Archives of American Art. I asked specifically for these Alma Thomas essay notes to be digitized, and the staff there obliged us so that we could access them. And then on the right-hand side, Eden's papers are at the University of Delaware. If we hadn't had these digitized during the run of the show, they would not have been available to our researchers to consult. And I will say, both of these interviewers talked to people that knew Alma Thomas during Alma's lifetime, and especially the Judith Wilson notes really provide some information, either confirming some whispers that we had heard but never really had documented, or like completely new spins on aspects of Thomas's life that we had no idea about. For example, in the Wilson papers, she consults Adolphus Ely, a friend and confidant of Thomas, who really unpacks Thomas's relationship with St. Luke's and the priest there. So, you know, this information was not available beforehand. And so I'm really proud that we were able to not just locate this information, but then provide it to ourselves and the other scholars, such that it really did make a difference in terms of the interpretations that we came to. We also wanted to mention that beyond the Archives of American Art and even the Thomas papers at the Columbus Museum, there are really a lot of different kinds of archives that we consulted. And one of them, as I mentioned, the Fort Wayne Museum of Art and the show that they organized in 1998, we were able to reach out to the curator who put that show together, Sachi Yanari. She is still at the museum. And she was so incredibly generous in sharing with us her memories of meeting Charles and John Maurice and other collectors that she consulted in putting her own show together in 1998. And she also mined the exhibition record for us. And so I'm just showing you here some of the collectors that she was able to track down. And in fact, because of this list, we were able to indeed further track these works of art, and some of them ended up in the exhibition. So those exhibition records had a very direct impact on how the show came together.
I just want to add, Jonathan, that she also saved us, her remarkable memory saved us from some gaffes as well, because she was able to recall the location of things at different times, which is so remarkable to me. But Jonathan and I assumed a couple of locations at specific periods in time, and she was able to disabuse us of those, preventing us from putting it inappropriately in the catalog or getting the record wrong, which is so vital and so helpful.
We also wanted to give a shout out to our colleagues at the Phillips Collection. It's been really such an amazing experience to have one of the venues of the exhibition be a place that Thomas actually visited that had an impact on her life. In addition to the archival material that we were able to consult, like this gallery installation, the folks at the Phillips also very kindly hosted a study day for many of the catalog authors and other scholars. And we spent a day and a half basically just talking all things Alma Thomas. And that was incredibly informative and really directly impacted the show as well. The reason why I wanted to show this particular image is that it shows, and this is a connection that we wouldn't have made except Renee drew our attention to. There's an Aero Saarinen chair in this gallery at the Phillips. I'm thinking it must be the annex, and Thomas also had two of those chairs herself. So maybe she saw them at the Phillips first, decided she wanted to go out and get them, but making that kind of very direct connection between Thomas and what she lived with and what she saw at a very important place to her, I think just helped us understand her better as both an artist and a person. I also just wanted to mention additional sources of archives that we consulted. Before working on this project, I did not know that the Library of Congress contains many, many architectural photographs from the District of Columbia, from various architectural surveys that have taken place through time. And they have this amazing group of period photographs of Thomas's parish, St. Luke's, which was just several doors down from where she lived on 15th Street in Washington. And what was important to me to help me understand better was this grouping of photographs has many exterior and interior shots. And so you get to really see what the space was like while Thomas was alive, what she would have seen when she was there for social functions or to worship, and how perhaps those visual stimuli like then sort of informed her own practice later. I also wanted to say that a big mystery for me as the curator in Columbus that oversees the Thomas materials here is that it's always puzzled me that we don't have many church records. We do know that her family, when it was in town, worshipped at St. John's AME Zion Church, and they then switched denominations when they moved to Washington. But I couldn't determine any baptismal records or confirmation records. And so I was able to reach out to the archives at the Diocese of Washington for the Episcopal Church in Washington, DC, and was able to locate her confirmation date and who the bishop was. And so that was really helpful in terms of understanding her as a rounder person, but also was helpful to one of our authors, Melanie Harvey at Howard University, who was really thinking through Thomas's relationship to St. Luke's and what that meant to her as a person and as an artist.
I think this question of kind of building a bigger picture, rounding out the personality of Thomas was really important to us. And one of the things that struck me in part as a photo historian were the incredible images photographic images in the Columbus Museum's collection. And this one really stuck out to me because you see Thomas and I believe it's two of her sisters and her mother. You have Jean Maurice on the left. You have sort of at the bottom her mother Amelia, and you have Catherine with the longer hair on the right side. And then you have Thomas there, sort of the tallest among them, sticking her tongue out at the camera, which to me just feels like you start to understand the dynamic of how the family operates. You start to understand how they interact. And importantly for me, you understand Thomas's awareness of the camera. And so as I started going through these photographic images, I was captivated by the way several of these images are ostensibly about the work that Thomas is creating. You see her posing with a bust on the left, a bust that she made in May Howard Jackson's class at Howard University in 23, 24. And you get a sense that she is aware of how she's positioning herself. That follows through to these images potentially made in her yard or on a lawn where she's putting a frame around a sculpture, presumably to make a study, an image that would represent the work of art. But of course, the photographer is also interested in her and positioning her as an artist. This would be a terrible photograph of document of the work of art. It really doesn't tell you much of anything about the work of art. And what surprised me is that Thomas's archive, both at Columbus and the Archives of American Art, is really littered with these photographs of images made in the lawn, in her backyard, sometimes on the side yard in certain examples that are presumably or ostensibly about documenting her paintings or other works of art. But they do a kind of terrible job of documenting, and they do an incredible job of showing everything else around it, which in some ways is the perfect metaphor for one of the goals of this project, which was to really show how the paintings fit into a larger picture, a larger galaxy of things happening in Thomas's world. The other thing I would be remiss not to talk about is Thomas's love of cats. This is something that it may be like the smallest footnote about Thomas, but for me and Jonathan both, Jonathan particularly, who's a cat lover, this really helps us understand who she is and how she identifies. The picture in the middle here is an invitation. You can open it up, it folds in half, and inside it reads, "I am celebrating my 12th birthday. You hop over the fence and join me. Listen for the signal." And so, presumably Thomas was giving this to somebody to come to a birthday party to celebrate her cat's birthday. And you get this sense of creativity and a little bit of a sense of mischievousness, and certainly an opportunity to connect with people, to bring people together through the space of her yard and her home, and with art at the center of it. So it really gives us early evidence of something that shows up throughout her life. The cat continues. There's a booklet that she put together, which to me was not only interesting because you see her working out her drawings of her friend, her cat, but it also begins to tell a narrative, and you get evidence of how Thomas is telling stories. And that shows up in her interest in theater as well. So there's another thread that ties in when you start looking through these elements of the archive. These are all early things in her papers.
I'm reminded by our listeners that, folks outside the museum world often don't understand how exhibitions come together. And so I just want to mention that Seth and I started working on this in really early 2017. So it really takes a lot of time. to put something of this magnitude together. But I think something that we were really grateful for is some early seed money to be able to research and develop the ideas that we followed through, and that we were able to really take our time. That time that we were afforded really allowed us to do the deep diving that produced the show that came about. I'm going to speak a little bit more quickly because I would really love to get to questions sooner rather than later. So I'll just mention briefly that this slide represents the researcher's dream, where I knew that we had Alma Thomas materials at the museum. My collection manager presented me the 4 boxes that she thought represented the entire holdings that were accessioned in this particular way. And then maybe 6 months later or so, she was like, you know, there's like one more box that I keep forgetting to tell you about. And I was like, oh, I would love to see what's inside. And actually, this is yet another body of information that had never been looked at or interpreted previously that we were able to bring to bear on the show. And that was, the box was all about her marionettes and teaching and using these as teaching tools. And so there were unpublished photographs, there were drawings. If you want to, this mechanical drawing that she created was included in this box. To us, this drawing really demonstrates her abilities to think beyond sort of the kind of right brain art that we usually think artists make. And this is like this very creative kind of left brain, logical, like everything has to work kind of way of working. And this has never been published before. People have never seen this. And to us, it really spoke to her education at Armstrong Manual Training School, where she actually learned how to do mechanical drawing as part of her curriculum. The other thing I'll just mention briefly is that it always really struck me as curious that of all of the previous exhibitions acknowledged that Thomas had received a master's of education from Columbia University in studio art, how to teach studio art, but no one had ever really mentioned anything about the actual thesis that she wrote. So one of the things that I made sure to do for this project was to go to Columbia and actually consult this document and make it available to Seth and our catalog writers. All of those pieces of information really come together and impact how we put the show together. So again, just not common to other presentations prior to our project on Alma Thomas. We showed a larger range of marionettes than have been exhibited previously. These 3 marionettes, I believe only the Mad Hatter has been shown before in Washington in 1981. But this photograph on the left and the drawing of how to put a puppet together on the right are completely new to the literature, never been published previously. And we wanted to share them with our audience. This is an example of where I think it's really easy as a researcher to think about like, oh gosh, like her papers are available, I'll concentrate my efforts on those papers. And that certainly has a certain logic to it. But given the amount of time and deep diving that we were able to do, it occurred to me that there may be other mentions of Thomas at the Archives of American Art that happened not to be in her own papers. And so I was able to look through a lot of the guides of artists that she knew when she was in Washington, DC. And there was one record in the Gene Davis papers. And I once again called upon our friends at the Archives of American Art to digitize that one record for me. I didn't know what it was. And it changed everything for us. This letter is from Thomas to Jean Davis, and in it, she specifically mentions going to visit Dumbarton Oaks. We knew that she visited parks and gardens in Washington and the surrounding area. It wouldn't necessarily have occurred to me that she would go to Dumbarton Oaks. It's kind of off the beaten path. It's a very Washington's Washington kind of destination. But she specifically mentions it in this letter. And to me, that just really brought home something that Seth really started to get me to think about even more through this project, which is how mobile she was, how she was so able fluidly to move throughout the city. And Dumbarton Oaks was one of the places she visited.
I'll just add to this that the thing that was also crucial for me about this is because it started to add texture to the specific relationships between Thomas and other artists of the Washington Color School. We lump her in all the time, but understanding how they relate to one another has been a little bit murky. And so having this little sliver of evidence about how formal their first meeting was and how in some ways she's very deferential, she's very formal in her letter, even though she was 30 years Jean Davis's senior. It just gives you a sense of how that particular relationship existed as opposed to perhaps one with Kenneth Nolan, where they were very much closer and more friendly, such that Kenneth Nolan would run across a gallery to say hi to her at his own opening. So it's important to understand those real world connections here. This is just a slide to touch on how the garden, drawing on what Jonathan said about Thomas's interest in Dumbarton Oaks. We really wanted to show how the garden existed vis-a-vis her paintings. This is a key moment in the show, both in our presentation at the Phillips, and I think all the others will do it, that show that Thomas is actively thinking about her garden as a source of inspiration for her paintings. And as a source for community building. So it's really weaving together all of these diverse threads. I'm picking up the pace a little bit so we can move quickly here because I want to share this slide with you in particular. This is two stills from a slideshow, a video reel that was produced in the 70s about Thomas. And this was the moment where these are the moments where Jonathan and I would just text each other back and forth, like, I can't believe it, I can't believe it, I can't believe it. Because it was the first time that I had heard Alma Thomas's voice. So I'm going to play you a little clip of this. I won't play the whole thing because it's quite long. And it starts out a little bit loud and then it quiets down. So hold tight here.
There's no other way that you can really enjoy expressions of people more about yourself and your surroundings than through color. Now, color expresses different moods in life. Some colors are happy, some are drab or dreary looking, and we have the warm colors and the cool colors. The warm colors come to us.
I won't go on. It's also a little bit muffled to hear, I realize, but it leads directly into this next slide, which is a combination of David Driscoll pine tree painting on the left, and one of Thomas's I guess we could call it a late abstract work before she moves to her early painted stripes. So this is a painting called Jonathan, help me out. It's Blue Night at Sea. The reason why we paired these two images together was in part because we knew of the deep relationship between David Driscoll and Alma Thomas and how far back it went. But that relationship changed shape when we heard Thomas's voice, because you started to perceive in a very palpable way how Southern she was, that at her core, and you can hear it in the way that she pronounces her words, she was born and raised in Southwest Georgia, and that was something that everyone who encountered her would have known because of how she spoke. And it's certainly something that she and David Driscoll, also born in Georgia, not terribly far, about maybe 2.5 hours by car now from where she was born. They had a connection over their southernness, and they had a connection over their art, but they had something else to connect about as well. I think that leads to our next here, Jonathan.
Just to give a shout out to my coworker, the amazing curator of history, Rebecca Bush, who so previous projects have provided sort of brief biographical treatments of the artist, and oftentimes, or like all the time, the amount of lines given to the family's years in Columbus is always pretty short in comparison then to after the family moves to Washington. And since the Columbus Museum was really, co-organizing this show and felt a lot of compunction about unearthing the story before the story, we really wanted to do a deep dive into Thomas's past while the family was here in Columbus. So I just want to say that while others have treated Thomas briefly in a biographical fashion, my curator of history, Rebecca Bush, was able to consult genealogical records, city directories that talked about different professions of family members. She tracked down land deeds and sales of property. And so I just want to emphasize that she really consulted a lot more documents than just sort of the brief kind of ephemera that John Maurice might have provided in the Archives of American Art, or was able to relate face-to-face. And a lot of that research that Rebecca performed was thanks to digitization of various records, including newspapers. This is just to talk very briefly about Thomas and memory, and how one of the ways that she drew on memory was to use the photographic record as a stimulus for her own art. But I think what really struck Seth and I in wanting to present something on the archive, which is all about memory, really, the past, is how much Thomas, as much as she lived in the present, she really also mined the past. Like, she very consciously made decisions to go back to her childhood in her mind, and then use those experiences in her post-retirement work. And so this is kind of almost a literal example of how she revisits her grandfather's farm and is using this photograph almost in a kind of one-to-one fashion to create this painting. Probably that was an assignment for her coursework at American University in the early 1950s.
You see that also culminating in her large abstractions. And this really changed, as Jonathan sort of put it, it's really changed the way that we began to see some of her most forward-facing, sort of future-pushing paintings. We started to revisit paintings like this one with an eye for the past, and we're able to connect it in literal ways. So she said about this painting, or a similar painting, quote, so she was drawing on a memory of these a creek that ran through in her near where she lived in Columbus, that had different colors of clay, which were likely produced by chemicals that were deposited through a mill, a textile mill not far away. And she would lay down, she would use those in her color experiments, in her sort of painting or making experiences. She also would be out in nature exploring, and she just says of that moment, she says, I would wade out in the brook, and when it rained, you could hear music. I would fall on the grass and look at the poplar trees, and the lovely yellow leaves would whistle. And you start to get this sense of a kind of synesthetic quality, but it is not one that only pushes out into the future, as this painting might suggest, but it is one that is deeply invested in her memory of her past. So I think, John, maybe you want to say something about this in particular, but there were, when we wrote the very, very long catalog, we had to make some cuts. And one of the things that we had to cut ultimately was as much gratitude and thanks as we wanted to share. We couldn't have 40 pages of thank yous, but we really owe quite a bit to several people who shared their knowledge, their documents, their personal experience. And Jonathan assembled this list to share with you all tonight, to at least acknowledge those people who made such a big difference in our ability to do this project.
And oftentimes too, just having archivists or librarians learn that we were working on this project, they would draw attention to materials that they knew about that we didn't, and we would never have known about unless they drew our attention to it. So we're just really so incredibly grateful for all the collaboration that has gone into this project. And this will give you a sense of the many different sources that go into such a large project.
I'll add that I don't think we acknowledge them here, but for Jonathan and I, the most rewarding thing is that this is continuing to create more interest. And Jonathan and I have been riveted by the work by Plain Sight Archive, which is, they currently only exist on Instagram, but they decided to take up the Little Paris Studio as a research project, the Little Paris Studio, which Thomas participated in the 1940s. And they uncovered quite a bit about several of the artists who were part of the collective, shared images of their work, and really wove together an incredible story about all of the people who were connected in that moment. It's so thrilling to us because there's just so much more to share, and people are helping us do that and doing it in new ways. This is to say that there are other elements out there that you can continue to explore. There is the catalog, of course, and there's also a documentary film which was able to capture quite a bit more archival information. It's presented as part of the exhibition and will continue to travel. And you can find out quite a bit more about that at almawthomas.org, which is a site that we're continually uploading with more information as the show and research progresses. And the show continues. It will be going to the Frisk Art Museum in Nashville, opening in late February, and then we'll come to the Columbus Museum in July of 2022. Jonathan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, well, actually, yes. Speaking of my amazing colleague, Rebecca Bush,
Yes.
please come see the show in Columbus. Alma W. Thomas, Everything is Beautiful, will be complemented by an entirely different exhibition at the same time that will treat the Thomas family and the Canty family in Georgia before they moved to Washington in 1907. So you'll get 2 for 1, and you'll have, I think Rebecca's show is really going to inflect how folks then go into the larger retrospective. So I really would hope and pray people, if they can come to Columbus, please come see us there. Seth, can you grab the link from the Yale blog and throw it up? Several people have been asking about music, and so yeah. I thought that would just be a quick and dirty.
Yeah, let me see. I'm going to stop sharing. I can't actually see the Q&A, so I'm going to stop sharing, and while we start to answer the questions, which I'm so eager to get to, I'll grab that and share it.
Well, I just wanted to thank you, Seth and Jonathan. This was a wonderful presentation. We always learn so much when you are with us, so thank you. I just wanted to start with a quick question. Is there something that you're still looking for in the archives? The several archives that you have consulted, is there, For us, we were hoping that there would be a contact between Phillips and Thomas that doesn't exist. They didn't correspond or anything like that. But in your deep diving, as we have discussed, is there still something you're looking for?
The location of a watercolor that's of the backyard. We have a black and white photograph of it from the archives at the Anacostia Community Museum, and we circulated it to several of our peer groups and thought perhaps it was by Lois Mailou Jones and consulted the foundation. We haven't been able to trace it or figure out whether Alma painted it herself or someone else, but she owned it. And it's so apparent that it's her backyard looking towards the house that we really wanted it in the show, but we just could not track it down.
I guess I have two answers. One answer is a big part of my research is really focused on Alma Thomas's educational work, both what she learned in school and what she taught in the classroom. There are really good records there, but all the time I'm finding out more and more about what happened at Shaw. Just the other day, Jonathan sent me some pictures from the interior of Shaw that I'd never seen before. I really want to help continue to build that world. There's also a painting that I don't know its whereabouts currently. It was in the collection of the Greenville Museum called Alma's Garden. I believe it's currently in private hands. I never got to lay eyes on it. And I desperately want to lay eyes on it because it's a bit of an unusual painting for her, and current whereabouts unknown. So not exactly archival, but I'm hungry for it. I want that. I want to see that painting so badly.
And I just have another quick question. You mentioned how John Maurice really culled a lot of the archives for the Archives of American Art. And I'm wondering, in that culling, what did she leave out? And how has that sort of shaped the narrative that we are now embracing about Alma Thomas?
I don't think so. She didn't, who knows? I mean, she may have excluded things, like actively excluded things, but what I know is what she did do, which is that she really emphasized the sort of art narrative, the art biography of Thomas, the painting narrative of Thomas, which is probably what Thomas wanted at the very end of her life as well. That's where she was going and what she was really focused on. There was a kind of rivalry between them at different times. There were, like any sisters, there were moments of a real deep affection, and there were also some strained moments. And it's not clear, where John Maurice felt about that at any given time, although it is clear that she spent much of the last part of her life sort of assembling this memory of her sister. So there was this like particular devotion that shows up in the archive. There have been a ton of questions. I'm just seeing out the corner of my eye. There's a ton of questions about Thomas's romantic life and questions about that. There aren't many strains in the archive about it, but I don't know, Jonathan, maybe you would agree or disagree. John Maurice probably didn't care to or want to share too much about that. It's there's not a lot of story to tell either, but maybe you could, since there seem to be questions, you could tell what we do know.
To be continued as someone who identifies as queer and also works on queer art and artists. For me, an absence of things or silence can often indicate some sort of queerness. And it's something I've been really focusing on in my research. Recently, I'm hoping to write an article about it. So I'm just kind of gathering steam, but it's something that's really kind of intrigued me. And once you start really paying attention to details, there's a lot of interesting things. Whether they add up to anything or not is a completely different story. I do believe she was romantically interested in men, at least for a chunk of time of her life. And I believe that based on photographs and anecdotes and some written things, it seems she was quite serious about a young man named Morton Crump, but somehow that relationship, even though they staged these engagement photographs, did not go anywhere, even though there's photographs of them very close and even goofing off together. So they obviously had some sort of rapport, and then he just sort of drops away, and she becomes very emphatic that she didn't want to get married because she really wanted to pour her energy into her art practice. And so she makes a conscious decision not to get married.
There are a couple questions about music. And so I know that Jonathan created a playlist for the show. And I was wondering if you could talk about the influence of music in Alma Thomas's life and some of the artists that she really loves, and speak a little bit more about that.
So I dropped, Jonathan wrote a great blog essentially for Yale, and I dropped that in the chat function so people can link to it there. And there's quite a bit of material that we uncovered. I think if there's one word to describe her musical interests, it's eclectic. She was interested in all kinds of music, and she would kind of jump around. The playlist that we assembled, that people can still listen to, it's on Spotify, has a range of interests from sort of bebop and big band, sort of jazz, earlier jazz, to a lot of rock and roll, like 60s and 70s rock and roll, to a lot of soundtracks, theater soundtracks. She was, her love of the theater was very deep. And so she was interested in film soundtracks and musicals. We tried to give an example, a little bit of an example of everything in the playlist that we put together, and it's sort of wild. It shows quite a range of interests, for sure.
Can you talk about the Sunday Beauty Club? There's been some questions about that.
John, you want to take that?
No, that's your area, speciality.
So the Beauty Club was a group that assembled around St. Luke. So Thomas, after she retires from teaching, she very much continues teaching, and there were various groups. One of them, the Beauty Club, was about the appreciation of beauty, and they did several things together, including art making and beautification exercises. But my favorite revelation was when we were in the Columbus Museum archives. I had this like weird end in my doctoral dissertation that talks about the exhibition of the Mona Lisa. And I was convinced that Thomas went to see it, but I didn't actually have a record that she brought her students down to see it. And there it was in the Columbus Museum archives, a newsletter about her taking her students. It's on the same page as a mention of the Beauty Club, so I think it was the Beauty Club members who she took down to see it. But in short, the Beauty Club was just interested in exploring the art of the city and sharing it with young people.
There's a question about the legacy that Thomas left on her students, and have any of her students come forth to claim the impact that she's had on their lives. And in the exhibition, we have a few examples of works of art by the students of Thomas, which I think is remarkable for the narrative of the show. And I feel like this question has come up a bit, and it's been a little bit hard to track down some of Alma Thomas's students. Is that correct?
We've tried. If you are a student of hers or you know a student of hers, please have them contact us. We're still really trying to get, I in particular, I'm really trying to get the texture of her classroom activity. But there are many people who have various memories of her work, and there are many people who went on to have artistic careers. So John Farrar, who was a painter in DC, a sculptor named Bill Taylor, who we have a work by him in the exhibition. We didn't include it in the exhibition, although it's mentioned in the catalog, but George Faison, who is a choreographer, he was a choreographer for Alvin Ailey, was in Thomas's classes. So she certainly had an impact on people who went on to have artistic careers. But from everything we know, she also had an impact on her students who did not go on to be artists. She helped her students become interested in community. And in my contribution one of my contributions in the exhibition catalog, I talk about one of her students who goes on to have a kind of service career after being in her classroom. So the stories thread out in any number of ways by her students.
And that kind of segues to another question where an attendee is asked about talking about the approach that Thomas used in prioritizing education, and the idea about community, I think, is something that she put to the fore, as you said, and the idea that opportunity, it could be really, any of her students could grasp at it, and I think that is something that, wouldn't you agree, she would have promoted as a teacher?
Yeah, I think that's, I get the sense that the core of her teaching was really community. I mean, the core of her creative interests was the creation and growth of community, which makes me feel good about this project, because I think that projects like tonight, where we're bringing people together, is, I resist sort of speaking on her behalf. I don't like to do that with artists who I've worked on, but I like to think that she would be really pleased that not only are people interested in her art, but they're interested in talking to one another because of her art. That seems to be at the core of what she did.
There's a question about Thomas and travel, and she did travel extensively, and how did she do it on a teacher's salary?
Jonathan, you should talk about
Yes,
that trip.
I will talk about this. So she is someone who makes very careful plans about her life. And so she knows that she has to have a day job in order to have retirement when she's going to retire. And she says that very plainly. She knows that she's going to retire, and so she sets herself up to do all of this art training ahead of that. Anyway, she came from relative wealth, upper middle class Black family in Columbus, and that somewhat transferred to DC. So there was always a little bit of money. And then once her parents were out of the picture, I think there was a little bit of an inheritance, but she basically, I think she saved and was a fairly frugal sort of person. But after she retires, she has her retirement income, and then she starts to sell her work. So she can do things like be a member of the Corcoran at $1,000 level, or go to New York whenever she wants to on the train, or take a 7-week trip to Europe in 1958. I think the big factor is that she makes it clear she didn't want to get married so she could do stuff like this. And if you're not married, you can spend your money the way that you want to. We need to wrap up. So I just want to say I created a Zoom link that's in the chat. If folks want to continue, we didn't get to all the questions. We can have another half an hour off the Phillips site and in the Zoom link that I have set up. And we look forward to seeing you there if you'd like to join us.
Thank you so much, Seth and Jonathan. Thank you. This is our last virtual program for the show. Please come to visit the Phillips to see the show until January 23rd, and then go see it at the Frist. It's going to be amazing. So thank you very much for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.